Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, whenever you happen to be listening. I am beyond thrilled to welcome an amazing woman to the show today. Her name is Sabrina Moon. She is the founder and CEO of the Problem Solving Institute, certified Dare to Lead facilitator for all of you Brené Brown fans out there, which I know there are many. So I am so excited to just kind of dive into some different topics. I think we're going to lean into some tough conversations today, but I had met Sabrina in the wonderful city of Dubuque, Iowa, at a Brené Brown seminar, just a couple little hours at a little session that we had down the street from my office. I was lucky enough to attend and bonded with a fellow Nebraska fan. So it's pretty exciting to meet a fellow Husker. And we've been building a little bit of a friendship through social media since we met last November. And so now we're just going to dig into life today a little bit more. So thank you so much for being here, Sabrina. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, actually. And I was really excited to do this with you. When you sent me the email, I was like, we have a lot to catch up on, but I also knew that there was going to be some good energy for us to have this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Well, I have to show you something. Now, for anybody that's just listening, you will not necessarily get the full impact of this. But Sabrina, I think you will understand as soon as I show you this why I'm showing it to you. But I had to show you my amazing sneakers.
Oh my gosh.
So for those of you that are listening, these are red New Balance sneakers, but I call them my Nebraska shoes.
I feel like I need to go over and get my Nebraska hat and put it on.
And I do have red and white stripes on. They were patriotic. This will air after the 4th of July, but I wanted to be patriotic and a team player as well for Nebraska today. So, or representative, not a player. Just representing. But yeah, so yeah, how is life in Indiana? Is it like sweltering hot there today?
Yes. And what's interesting about being in this part of the country is that it gets really humid in the summer months, but it stays, pretty decently mild in the spring. And sometimes it can get hot, but it's been in the 90s the past week. So when I go out for my walks, I have to be prepared that they'll probably be short-lived. Yeah.
Yes. I tried to run in 85-degree heat last week and I paid for it for the rest of the day. Like it is. We're in the hot, we're just in the heat zone. I think we're supposed to have the hottest July on record.
Oh, wow.
This July. I don't know. I mean, I watch these little weather map things that come up on my app. I believe everything that comes up on apps.
Yeah.
Maybe I should start just double checking that stuff before I broadcast it broadly like that.
Yeah. Well, that tells me maybe if I start my own app that maybe, I can share some information that you would probably believe too. So
yes. I told somebody yesterday, I'm like, I am gullible. Always. I would like to think at some point people will not be able to prank me anymore, but I just don't see that happening. I'm just always
you're the fun to play the tricks on.
Yes. Yeah. I'll be like, sure, I'll follow the carrot. Good, bad, or indifferent. That's I don't know. I don't think that's going to change about me. But as we get into the show, I just want to hear a little bit about your journey. I got to hear bits and pieces of it from when you presented at that seminar, but share your story about how you arrived at the position that you're in now, starting your own business, and just take us through your career up until now.
Okay, yeah. So of course, I remember it was Northeast Iowa Community College that had invited me to speak in Dubuque. And I remember traveling there and flying there. And I know oftentimes we hear of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio being flyover states. And at the time when I had come to Iowa to speak, I was living in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So very mountainous there, a lot of trees. But then when you fly over the flyover states, you see a lot of rolling hills and cornfields. And it was really nice to see the cornfields and just the agriculture because it reminded me of home. So my family mostly farms, the majority of them. So it was a nice, really kind of stage for me to walk into that environment and to talk with everyone about Brené Brown's research. So as you referenced, we had a keynote session and a workshop on her research. And when I think about her work and my career journey and starting my business, it's all kind of tied together, ironically, and not planned. And yeah, I think that's what's interesting about our career and our choices, is sometimes things just naturally happen without plan, sometimes as a result of failure. So I like to call myself a recovering engineer because I no longer work as one. So I'm recovering from the use of excessive checklists, being a knower all the time, always being right, all the standard engineering behaviors that frankly, a lot of people in my profession are rewarded to engage in. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make us bad. It's just, kind of the nature of it. But when I think about my journey, I'm pretty much a blue collar worker. I really kind of worked my way up from blue collar roles and being in the trenches with different organizations and companies that I've worked for. So some of the places that I led, and when I started my leadership journey, it was in my, mid-20s. I started as a maintenance supervisor for General Motors. So when I first went into that industry, I thought that my background as an auto mechanic, because that's what my dad did for a living, I thought my background knowing how to repair cars was going to set me up for success as a leader in manufacturing, and boy was I wrong. So I ate a lot of crow, but each year I learned a little bit more and kept trying to apply myself and kept showing up, and sometimes not to the best of my abilities, but just did the best I could. And over time, I took my skills to Class 1 railroading and even passenger railroading. So I led some pretty large teams within Amtrak or Burlington Northern Santa Fe out west. That's what took me to Nebraska. So that's the connection that you and I have, living out in Nebraska, actually railroading. The town that I lived in was Alliance, Nebraska, and that community gave me I like to call it stress bark. So stress bark, like when you think, that term is from a tree, when we first plant a tree. Yeah. And if there's a storm and the wind's blowing the tree, a tree is developing its stress bark so that it can become resilient and strong enough to weather the storms. And Alliance, Nebraska is what gave me my stress bark. It really weathered me in a way that helped prepare me for all the challenges and opportunities I was going to have ahead of me. So for sure, my background is technical and engineering, but I started transitioning more into leadership and leading people. And the way I uncovered Brené Brown's work was really from a personal perspective. I was helping a manufacturing organization really kind of recover from potential bankruptcy. And it was really challenging, a lot of hours, 12 to 16-hour days. But things were great in my career, but my personal life was in the toilet. Things weren't healthy there. My family, my mom specifically, was going through breast cancer. And I was overwhelmed and just felt beat down. Yeah. And a close friend of mine had referred Brené's work to me. And this was probably 2012-ish, maybe 2011. And I watched her video on the power of vulnerability, her TED Talk on the power of vulnerability.
I get goosebumps just when you say that, like, it's life-changing.
Yep. That's how I got to know her work. So I got curious, and slowly, as I got more and more familiar with her work and her research, I found the courage to start applying it in the work that I was doing as a engineer, again with the railroad, and started seeing some successes. And then in 2017, I started my own company. And once that happened, one of the services that I offer is leadership development, all really kind of focused on Brené's work. I became a facilitator, a certified facilitator, over a year ago, a little over a year ago now, and have just been doing that since. That's pretty much all I do, is teach people the skills of courage now. So that's the quick walkthrough of my journey and starting my business and where I came from. So
So you know what's funny? I just realized this because I saw the notes on the corner of my desk. I still have my sticky notes from that session, from that workshop.
Oh, wow.
I know I didn't keep the rest of the folder, but I took these out when I was cleaning out my office. But I stay out of comparison and competition with my colleagues was one of the things that I wrote down. I tackle the problem, not the person. I'm not even sure the specifics of the conversation, but these are always good reminders for me. I choose doing what is right over what is fast, fun, easy, or comfortable. That was from the list of options. I approach challenging situations with the goal of collaboration and problem solving rather than placing blame. Again, I don't remember the specifics of the conversation, but I do remember as I was like cleaning stuff out, I was like, I need to hang on to those notes. I remember just pulling them off of the piece of paper, and they've been on my desk. And yeah, they're good reminders for me when I start to get in those really, I don't want to say self-centered. I don't know if that's the right word, but when I'm kind of like focusing on the wrong stuff. So, so yeah, I mean, there's so much fascinating, like our journeys are all so different. It does seem like it doesn't always make sense in the moment, but then it all starts to just come together. And I've really been like hooked on this idea lately that it's really hard to know the impact that people are going to have on your lives when you meet them, or when you interact with their work. Like it's just crazy how it stirred something in you, right? Like as soon as you started to, like when you watch that video, I mean, it's really hard to not have some sort of perspective shift in that moment.
I agree. And I almost, as you were sharing that, and this will feel vulnerable, but as you were sharing, like, we don't really know how people are going to have an impact on us. I want you to know, like, a lot of the posts that you share on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is quite a different platform than, your Facebook or Instagram, but you're having an impact on people from showing up in a place of authenticity, vulnerability, and really kind of encouragement. And oftentimes, for whatever reason, LinkedIn isn't framed in that way. So thank you for showing up differently, because you've been a source of encouragement for me at times when I'm just scrolling through LinkedIn. Oftentimes I see, I see people promoting businesses, but I also see sometimes an unhealthy dialogue that's being posted on people trying to maybe be right about certain points, but then I see your video and take, a couple minutes to watch it, and I always feel better. So I hope you know that you have an impact on people in that way, because we just never know when we're going to bump into that. The same is true with Brené's research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. I think that, we have these opportunities all day, every day, and it looks different now, right? Because we're in a pretty isolated world right now, that we choose how we're going to show up. And I don't always show up and represent myself exactly the way that I would want to. It's not always ideal. But I also, before I, when it goes out on social media, like, it's so public, right?
Yeah.
And not that I'm trying to put on some sort of persona, but I also have to think about, like, this is how I want to show up for people. Mm-hmm. This is, regardless if anybody sees it or not. And that's always been my philosophy. I don't know if anybody's going to watch it. I have no idea. But if they do watch it, I want them to walk away feeling better than they did before they saw it.
Yeah.
So I think that, there probably could be a little more good in the world if we just kind of were like, let's push out more positivity. It can still be very real, right? This isn't about avoiding reality. Yeah. It's just really about trying to find that bright spot in the middle of really uncertain situations that we're all finding ourselves in right now. So have you noticed, as everything has changed so drastically. I mean, obviously we met at an in-person session. This isn't an option that we have anymore. Like, so obviously there's some pretty, I could pick out some ways that your business has probably changed in terms of doing virtual sessions with people and things like that. But have you noticed just a difference in what you find your clients need right now?
Yes, considerably. When I think about the word I heard you say, uncertain, that things are uncertain right now, take the word uncertain and then pump it full of steroids. Like the environment that we're in and the space that we're in our world is like uncertainty on steroids. Really, it's vulnerability on steroids. And the reason I'm substituting vulnerability is that's an emotion we feel when we feel uncertain, when we feel we're at risk or emotionally exposed. And a lot of us have this belief that vulnerability equals weakness. Mm-hmm. And myself included. Like, I remember believing and growing up and hearing that vulnerability is what girls did. And then if I wanted men to take me seriously, because I've worked in obviously technical environments, if I wanted them to take me seriously, don't do vulnerability. Like, you don't do that. You don't show that. So that was a huge myth I grew up believing to be true. And it turns out vulnerability is our greatest measurement of courage. Mm-hmm. So as we're navigating so much uncertainty in our world, it's natural and normal that we're seeing all kinds of really interesting and maybe behaviors that are out of people's integrity right now. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make people bad. It just means that some people are hyper aware. They have self-awareness that they're dealing with vulnerability, and some people have no awareness at all. And bad behaviors or difficult behaviors are a way to communicate that we're struggling with that uncertainty. So my work, when you think about that time we met, I definitely am one of those people. I don't prepare keynote notes. Like, I have points I want to make, but I don't memorize speeches. I don't know how to do that. I used to be horribly afraid to give speeches in my younger years. Now I just show up with people and just, I want to be with them and speak in a space that meets them where they are. And oftentimes I have to kind of navigate that and pivot a little bit if something isn't reaching folks. That's kind of how I speak. And now that everything has changed with being closed down and we're not having face-to-face workshops, face-to-face keynotes, there's this electronic device that is a barrier between me and the leaders and organizations I'm serving. I had to really work through that. I was saying no to some things when I first started out of fear. Yeah. But I had a wonderful coach say to me that the same energy that I am looking for and the connection that I'm seeking when I'm with people in person, I can trust myself that I'll find that even though there's a laptop in the way or a computer in the way. So one of the tips that, actually I shouldn't say a tip, it's permission. I gave myself permission to let go of looking at the camera dot and focusing, if we're looking at that camera, it looks like I'm giving you eye contact. So right now it looks like I'm looking at you, but the reality is I'm not, and I can't see you. So I gave myself permission to just look at you. Yeah. Even if I'm looking kind of to the side, I still need to be able to connect with you in that way. And then everything works fine. Keynotes, workshops, etc. So the clients I'm serving right now just need a place to purge. Mm-hmm. So just to get out whatever is in the way. Oftentimes validation is really helpful. So tons of empathy. So that's mainly what I'm doing, is doing a lot of listening. Sometimes we'll do some problem solving, but a lot of times they just need to hear like, geez, is all this that's happening, is it normal? Yes, it's normal. So that's really how I'm serving my clients now, which was different before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and leaders now, I mean, it's not like the problems that they're dealing with are different. Like, their employees are feeling a whole different set of emotions, different stresses. I keep hitting this microphone. Like, all of that looks different than it did. I mean, some stresses are constant, like workloads, whatever, but even like you think about trying to make sure everything's working at home the way it should be. You know, if your kids are now here all the time, they don't have the same activities. So you have familial issues that are going on, you have work, and it's all now just like mashed together, and now leaders need to show up and help their employees navigate it. Like, it's a lot. It is it's a swamp, right? Like, from the gifts of imperfection, like we gotta take each other's hands, and we gotta like walk through this swamp, and we're not in a space really where we can continue trying to like move around the perimeter.
Yeah. And the very thing that's so good. The very thing that I'm doing with my clients is exactly what I would ask leaders of organizations that are listening to this to do with the people that they're serving. So listen, validate emotions, and empathize. Mm-hmm. Because the people that are working for you are struggling probably with the same things you are.
Yeah.
And in some ways, when I see leaders of organizations saying, hey, I'm not really sure what's next, this is uncertain for me too, I know that feels like weakness, but how is that comment weak at all? If anything, it's brave to say, I'm not sure. Because who is sure what's coming?
Mm-hmm.
We may have a second wave of COVID. We're not sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information to sort through. And these are challenging, conflicting times right now. So we're all feeling vulnerable. We're feeling probably anxious. There's a lot of grief. And grief isn't a word that we typically associate with what we're going through right now, but the way of our life 3 months ago has changed. Yeah. So anytime there's a change, there's grief. That's the emotion that shows up for people. So if we can create space as leaders for our people to grieve and just acknowledge that might be the emotion they're feeling, I think that's really helpful to help people move through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of, for me, I get trapped in this thing where I'm like, I will tell myself like it could be worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't really process what it is that I'm feeling, because I'm like, well, I shouldn't be upset about this. And I think like that whole thing of like giving ourselves permission to really feel it, like it is grief. We don't like to use that word. We like to isolate the definition of that word into a very, small set of circumstances that warrant grief. But really, it's any sense of loss.
For sure.
We don't get to, be with friends and family the way that we want to. For me, like all of my, travel and conferences all canceled, everything until who knows. I mean, I'd like to be thinking like 2021 will look different than 2020, but there is grief associated with that. And I think it's, but there's also a lot of vulnerability in allowing yourself to feel grief.
Agreed. And when we talk about even the word grief, and I watch sometimes the responses of people that I'm talking with when I say the word, I think there's this tendency to be like, okay, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to deal with that, but our body needs it. And the way is through. So the way through grief is through, meaning not ahead of it, not in the middle of it. We've just got to walk through it. And when we think about the light that it is that we're looking for, it's coming. There's going to be a lot of healing, a lot of good change that happens as a result of what we're learning with this pandemic, even what we're learning with Black Lives Matter movement. So there'll be a lot of healing that comes as a result. I know it's tough. I know we all have views and standpoints that maybe we feel really passionate about. A lot of this stuff is really challenging values and beliefs that we, grew up learning. And there will be healing. There's light coming. So it's not just going to be hard grief for a long period of time. So that's what gives me hope and encouragement. I also recognize that I'm learning a lot about myself. COVID kind of gave me a break. So I felt a little bit of relief, and then I recognized like how much self-care I was not doing. So I've made some changes. So, those are positive things already in the midst of something really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, we're experiencing so many things all at the same time. It's like a layer cake. Like there's just so much. But I think it's like, we also have to understand, like, people are experiencing things at different levels. Like, I might feel things more intensely than somebody else. And, there are days, you said something before about, just like feeling things and acknowledging them. Like, there are days that I wake up and I'm like, I don't want to do vulnerability today. My brain is calculating it as weakness. I don't want to do it. But I saw something this morning as I was doing my journaling, and it was talking about every day you have to meet yourself where you're at.
Agreed.
But there are days where I'm like, no, I want to be a different person today.
Can I ask in return, like, how do you do that? How do you meet yourself where you are? What's that process look like?
For me, like it's probably a little bit different every day, but it really is this practice of acknowledging my feelings in the moment, like not saying I'm going to go take a break and then get back to this. Like, it doesn't matter if I go outside to feel like I might be able to process it better if I'm in fresh air and sunshine than I would if I'm like in my office in front of my computer, but also just like acknowledging it. Like that's my first step. Because I do want to stuff things down and I want to like paint the smile on and I want to get back to going about my day, because slowing down to feel things is slowing down my day and what I want to accomplish. But I also know if I try and just kind of bury it, it's just like sludge that's slowing me down the entire day.
Mm-hmm.
So
the body keeps score. So like when we don't acknowledge, that's so great when we don't acknowledge and really kind of bring forth the emotions that are surfacing. When we stuff them down, the body will keep score. So perfect example. Remember what I did for a living as an engineer. I'm paid to think and do, never to feel. So I was not taught that it was okay to have emotions. I was a classic stuffer of feelings. Like, now my behaviors weren't always the best. So I was a classic, I use this term, I would come out swinging.
Yeah.
So if I needed something done right away, I would use shame, fear, maybe some bullying to get things accomplished in the places that I led. Those are not proud moments, but I had no good self-awareness of what I was feeling. I would push emotions down and then the behaviors would show that rear the ugly head. So when I think about men that might be listening to this, the same applies for men. Like, we all have emotions, you as well. The socially accepted emotion that we see from men, especially in the workplace, is anger. And what I love about anger is it doesn't scare me anymore when I see it. What I love about it is anger is a secondary emotion. It's like a flag. It lets me know that there's something underneath it. So it's an initiatory emotion. It helps us move into positive change, which is awesome. So if we can look at anger in that way from a different perspective, that's healthy. And I also think we have to do one more thing when we see anger. We have to just look at, peel back what's under anger. What's here? Am I feeling grief? Am I feeling shame? Am I feeling resentment? Am I afraid? Am I just really tired? What's under this? If we could peel that back, acknowledge it, your exact process, Olivia, acknowledge it, and then be like, all right, this is here. Yeah. Then the way is through. We just walk through it, and then we can process it and go about our day. And sometimes we may need to go take a walk outside or take a break. All normal, healthy, not only leadership behaviors, but human behaviors. I wish somebody would have taught me this like in my 20s.
Can we do a vulnerability like skills training for kids?
Yes.
I mean, so I was always like a very emotional kid. Like I was like heart on the sleeve, and I still am. Like I have no poker face. You're going to always know what I'm feeling. And like, even like the speed at which I will go silent during a conversation, if people know me, then they will know if I'm just like, I don't know what to say, or if I'm upset. Like I am like, I'm so just like obvious, I guess. But I mean, if you know me well, like it starts to become like way too obvious all the time. Even, like my kids know, they're like, like they can just read it. But I just like, I look at like I have 3 kids, all, very different ages, 13, 10, and 7. Couldn't be going through, 3 more different stages of life, I don't feel like. But my 13-year-old has like, I never was sure if I wanted to be the mom that was friends with my kid. And I wouldn't say we're friends, but I also feel like we've built this relationship where he can come talk to me about hard things. We took a road trip and we had 16 hours in the car, and we had some really tough conversations about being a freshman in high school, what life is like, the pressures he's going to face, what is he most worried about. And it was just this amazing conversation that, had I not been willing to be vulnerable, would have never happened.
Yeah.
And like, I do want to like help raise emotionally resilient children. Yeah. But I don't know how often like that stuff is talked about with our kids.
That's a good point. What I'm learning slowly from some of my friends and colleagues that work in the education space, SEL, which is social emotional learning, is, I think, somewhat of a fairly new concept that they're trying to integrate into our education system. But even if you don't have that type of programming, so let's say you're in an elementary school or middle school, I've heard Brené say her research, like, it's not too young to teach kids shame resilience. It's not, because shame starts to really surface when I think for girls, probably 8 or 9 maybe, and then boys a little bit later, but it's not too late to teach them the steps of shame resilience. It's not too late to teach them self-compassion. It's not too late to teach them what vulnerability is or isn't. I remember when that messaging landed with me as a kiddo, it was young.
Yeah.
So I made decisions my whole career based upon what I heard. Were my parents doing the best that they could? Absolutely. And they showed up in a way that they thought was helping me. And then I had to get curious about maybe what information was wrong. But it's not too late. So even if you don't have programming, I know on Brené's site, she's got all kinds of free content and videos for educators that they can bring into their classroom. So she's passionate about that, which I think is helpful.
Yeah.
So if there's ways to take whatever's out there and start to integrate that learning into your classroom, do it. Is it going to feel uncomfortable? Yes. When I get up in front of a large group of executives and leaders who've been doing what they've been doing for years, and I say to them, vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measurement of courage. I'm here to teach you that. They're all like, been down this road, heard it, and done that. And it feels really uncomfortable to say, we can do this. We can have this conversation. I'd rather do it with the young kiddos, but if we need to do it later, okay.
Yeah.
Because self-awareness is a skill that I think we are missing in our organizations considerably. I didn't have it. Wish I would have had it younger, but we need it for sure. Because who we are is how we lead, and if we're not aware of how we're behaving, chances are people are afraid to tell us.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it just, the more self-awareness you have, I think the more efficient of a communicator, and obviously the level at which you're able to empathize is going to go up. And it becomes like, it can be a huge influence one way or the other, right? Either for the good or maybe not so good, where you've created a wall with your employees that they feel like they can't come to you when things are difficult, or to give you feedback and things like that. But I think that if we exercise vulnerability and empathy, then I think we are able to just work together better, right? We become more collaborative. We're able to have open feedback conversations. Those walls don't go up. You know, I can come to you and say, this is the tough part about, like, or here's what's going on with your work. This is where I need there to be improvement. I can deliver that in a compassionate way, and the employee can then receive it in a way that they know that you brought it with their best interest in mind. I think it just kind of, it reforms the conversation. Like, it's just different.
Agree. You know, we typically associate not only vulnerability with being weak, but we associate it with the tough emotions like shame, fear, scarcity, and grief. But it's actually, vulnerability is the emotion that lives in all these environments that we want more of. So if we want love, belonging, and joy, vulnerability is the path. If we want innovative workplaces, vulnerability. More problem solving, vulnerability. If we want to be able to give feedback, receive feedback, hold people accountable, vulnerability. There it is again. It keeps showing up in all these places and situations that we're like, why can't we get to root cause here? Why can't we have more innovation?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we've not created safe places for people to fail in our workplaces,
yeah,
who's going to be willing to create something that didn't exist before?
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, like, there's a time element to this, right? It's not like, hey, I went to this seminar, or I've been doing this coaching, and like, I'm real great with empathy and vulnerability, and I'm going to be showing up differently, and you guys are just going to respond differently. Like, there's a time element in terms of, like, everybody really being able to adapt to this, because it's a different way of thinking. It may be a completely different way than an organization has really been running for a long time.
Agreed. So when I think about your journey, you're a perfect person for me to somewhat kind of tie this example to.
Okay.
I've known you since November, so not quite a year. I think about how we've got to know each other and what I've seen you do since then. It was not an overnight process.
Mm-hmm.
So far of the changes that I've led in organizations, if I'm going to do a business transformation or a culture transformation, you know, it's like 3 years. That stuff to kind of live in people's bones and really start to take hold. So where I would see companies really struggle and fail, myself included, is that there's this expectation of drive, change, let's get immediate results, let's see it tomorrow. You'll have aha moments. You'll have moments that crack you open and you're like, oh my gosh, I just learned something huge. But then building the habits in to engage differently and to show up differently, that takes practice. It takes what we call grounded confidence over time for that to continually show up. So even in the time that I've known you and watched how you've transitioned and really kind of opened, kind of like a butterfly, and the content that I've seen you put out there was not overnight. It's not like I saw that in November.
Yeah.
So it's been a slow process even for you to step into a vulnerable space of exposing yourself and putting yourself out there for people to see. So I would say be patient with yourself if you're going to start practicing the skills of courage. If you just go into the boardroom tomorrow and say, I'm going to be more vulnerable, that's probably not going to work out very well.
Right.
And I'm probably going to get some hate emails. You might too. But I think it's brave to say, I'm learning about myself. And I know I want to be more vulnerable. I need to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
Give me an opportunity to learn. I'm going to screw this up. but I'm going to try and show up in a way that's authentic with my values. It's going to take a little bit. It's the onion peeling.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So here's my funny story about like immediately feeling vulnerable when I met you.
Okay.
So we're all sitting there and you're asking about football fans. I believe we were having the football conversation, right? And you asked about Iowa Hawkeye fans because that's the majority of the room. And like most people raise their hands and you're like, any other teams? And I just sat there. I'm like, I'm not going to say it. I'm not. I've been made fun of my whole life for being a Nebraska fan. I'm not going to say it. And I was like, and then you were like, Nebraska? And I was like, ah! But it was like, I was so scared. I'm like, nobody in that room cared. They didn't care. But in my head, I was like, nope, this is just I'm going to be embarrassed or humiliated or feel weird about it. And granted, Nebraska fans sometimes take a little heat, but it was just like, then as soon as you like said that, I was like, it felt like this weird, like, okay, for one, I felt like I should have said something. I should have just been like, I'm a Nebraska fan. Like I should have just admitted it and not tried to cover it up or pretend it didn't exist. But it also was like this reminder to me, like, Olivia, you are who you are. Like you're a unique individual with maybe different tastes than other people in the room, and you don't need to assimilate with what everybody else is doing. So I think it's like just the bravery that has to take place like that, but bravery doesn't exist without vulnerability, right?
Correct. So when you think about, here's the best question that Brené Brown could have ever asked us. And it's the one that it's just on repeat in my mind. And this has been a current question that she asked Special Forces leaders. So she does a lot of work with military. And the way she asked it really changed the game. The question was, okay, if you're not really buying the whole vulnerability tied to courage thing, let me ask you a question. Name an act of courage that you've witnessed in your life or your workplace that did not require uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure. So far, we haven't been able to find an answer to that because there is no courage without vulnerability. When we think about brave acts, so for example, you saying, hey, I'm a Nebraska fan, for you to speak out, there was a lot of people in that room.
Yeah.
And there were lots of opportunities in real time that people felt vulnerable. And even when you think about our empathy misses and those opportunities that we talked about, in real time, I was exposing people to the feeling of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Fitting in is like a desire that every human has. They want to fit in, they want to make sure they belong. And when that feeling isn't there, we feel shame. We feel like there's something wrong with us. So those emotions are powerful and they stop us from raising our hands. They stop us from saying what we need to say. So that's why we say vulnerability is our greatest measurement of courage. And that question, I think, is like really sums up a lot of Brené's work in a very powerful way. So it's helped me a lot. It helps the people that I'm leading a lot too.
Yeah.
No courage without it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also be brave. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I have learned, and I think we might have talked about it a little bit that day, but you just mentioned it before, was empathy misses. I have had several of them. I've had them in the last 3 months. Like I probably had one last week. Like it happens. And I've gotten to a point where I will go back to that person. I will be like, I'm sorry. I did not respond well. I was not like, I was caught off guard or whatever. This is what I want to say now. And I know it probably doesn't necessarily fix the conversation from back then, but I just want you to know that I'm sorry. And this was the appropriate response. And I don't know, sometimes it is received very well. But it is, it's a little bit painful to do.
It is. And thank you for your courage and your leadership to do that. Well, it's necessary. Imagine if we did it more.
Yeah. I mean, and that's fine. It kind of goes back to like, even when we talk about doing it with our kids, Like, it reminds me, I owe my kids an apology from last week. I'll do it tonight, I promise. But yeah, I mean, as parents or as employers or anywhere in our lives, we're just gonna miss the mark sometimes. And I think that going back and just being very open, hopefully helps that person, for one, understand how sincere you are about wanting to show up better, but helps them heal, like, because that can, if you react poorly, it can be very damaging to the other person, and it can create a system where people are constantly like, they're building that wall a little bit higher, but hopefully it takes that wall down a little bit.
Yeah, and exactly what you're describing is there's no trust without vulnerability. So if we have trust issues within our organization, this is one of the ways that trust is deteriorated. So if there's a behavior that happens or something that's said, let's say I say something out of my integrity to you, and I know it, but I don't want to embrace the suck of vulnerability and come back to you and say, hey, how I showed up is out of my integrity. That will infringe upon, like, the loyalty you have for me is going to decrease, and the trust is definitely going to decrease. So by me coming back and saying that's not how I want to show up, I need to clean that up, I need to show up differently. And even if the same example holds true for an empathy miss, so if you share something hard with me and I respond in a way that's not empathic, and the classic leadership response, like the most popular one, is probably the fixer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you share something hard with me, like, hey, I just had this hard experience with my kiddo, and I say, well, what you should have done was this and this and this and this. That's an empathy miss. That's a missed connection opportunity. Ideally, my response needs to be, I get it. Like, I've been there, and just listen to the emotion that you're sharing and not try to fix it.
Yeah.
So even if I screw that up, circling back to you and saying, I'm sorry, Olivia, I didn't mean to show up in that way. I needed to do more listening. You were trying to tell me something hard. I'm listening. What do you think that does with trust? You think it grows it? Of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how powerful vulnerability is. And I know there's so many things that get interwoven with that. It's not just in itself, but it is like the starting point.
Yeah.
A lot of really good things.
Wish I would have known when I was in my 20s. It would have saved me a lot of, like, pain and mistakes. Oh boy.
Yeah. If we all could go back and do a few things over, I'm sure that we have lists of things.
Yeah.
So as you work with leaders of, I'm like, all different types of organizations, I'm sure, different businesses from A to Z, right?
Yeah.
How do we get women to embrace leadership, to give themselves permission to step into leadership, or to really embrace the responsibilities of leadership if they are in a leadership position?
I think I heard you say it. It starts with permission. So when I think about leading, I didn't see myself as a leader. I kept being selected for things or put in positions of leadership, and often confused, like, why am I here? What are we doing? I had to give myself permission first. It was okay for me to feel strongly about something and to lead a group. I also had to give myself permission maybe to be out front, which is a little lonely on occasion. But when you're a wholehearted leader, all you got to do is turn around, and you can see that there's plenty of people there to support you along the way. When we're struggling with shame, what I call, like, shame-based leadership, Brené has an assessment that's really helpful on that. It's the Daring Leadership Assessment. When we're struggling with armor, we can turn around and sometimes see that there aren't people following us and probably afraid to give us feedback. But when I think about women in general that are leading, it starts with permission. It also starts with recognizing what's in your way. What's in the way of you stepping into that?
Yeah.
What's the fear? And I ask a lot of people that, what's the fear? And then feel it, do it anyway. If you're called to serve, we need you there.
Yeah.
So that would be the answer I would give over and over again. And it'd be to women, it would also be to men. If you're called to serve, we need you. But I think traditionally, some of the gender norms for our society in general really still aren't favoring women in leadership positions. And that's no one's immediate fault. This is just the way things are designed at the moment. But that doesn't mean it can't change.
Yeah.
And I'm watching plenty of men that I've been leading and men that have been mentoring me grow and change along the way too. So we're getting there, and it's time. So start with permission and then identifying what's the fear in the way.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard, and sometimes like the fear changes, right? You think you've gotten past it, and then you're like, ooh, I didn't know this thing was coming. And it like a different thing creeps in. So yeah, being able to name it, there's so much power. Oh my gosh. You gotta then you can call it out.
Yeah.
Be like, I don't think so, not today.
That's right.
So you mentioned mentors before. Who has had a major impact on your life?
Geez, the list is long.
Yeah. You can just give me like your top 3.
Okay. So right out of the gate, when I think about leadership, there are a couple of people that are in the front of my mind right now. This is probably not serving some that have helped me before, but they're, so Ann Plater has been one of my mentors over the years. She's retired from General Motors. So she was actually responsible for bringing me into that career path, but she's been in and out of my life from a mentoring and friendship perspective, kind of guiding, answering questions, and just modeling certain behavior that I admire. We have a co-ed softball team, and she's playing on that team right now. And
awesome.
Most of us are injured, and she's not. So like, she's showing us how it's really done. But she's been great. Russ Bird, it's funny. I don't know why General Motors is front and center, but he is a retired general foreman at a facility in Ohio that was cast aluminum and cast iron foundry.
Okay.
So they made engine blocks, heads, and crankshafts for General Motors vehicles. So when I worked there as a maintenance supervisor, pretty tough environment, very loud, very dangerous. And he had an approach about him that was really influential. I think about him and how he treated me a lot. And I remember his courage when he asked me one time to have a little compassion and empathy for men, because he said, with you being one of the only female supervisors here, I'm going to ask for you to show us a little bit of compassion, because we are kind of afraid of you. We don't know, like, we've not worked with women in this capacity. We don't want to be afraid, but just give us a little bit of a break as we learn how to work in a space with females, because we're not really sure. So that was brave to say that out loud. I was like, okay. And then I would say the third, I mean, obviously Brené has been a mentor and an influence, but recently I had a meeting with a police officer that showed up in my life that was really helpful, and it was a meeting I just had this week. He influenced me many, many years ago that really helped change the path of where I was heading in my life. And I know that's probably a conversation saved for later when I've had some more time to process, but those are the 3 that are coming up in my mind.
Yeah. It's so interesting, because all these people, like we talked about before, like they come into your life, you don't know what it means. Then you look back and you're like, whoa, my life would be so much different if I hadn't had the influence of that person at that point in time. Like, it was meaningful at that exact moment. I love it. I loved it. Like, I like to think about the fact, and this is going to get old on my podcast because I think I've already said it before. There are like 8 billion people on this planet. There's a lot of reasons for you and me to have never met.
Yes.
But here we are.
Yes.
And I love to think about, even though there are so many people, our world is so small, and these people come into our lives and there is some meaning behind it. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people. And it's just, I don't know, like, I don't try and understand it, like exactly why it is what it is, but I do love it when that clarification comes.
Yeah.
Like, that's an amazing moment. So yeah, I don't know.
We allow people to teach us. Sometimes they teach us a little bit about ourselves or how we see the world, how we see other people.
Yeah.
But in some ways, even with some of the painful experiences we bump into, I don't know. I just don't see that there's mistakes with people that we meet. So I agree with you. It's fascinating when those things kind of come together.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do future plans look like for you? Obviously, life is kind of weird, right? Like there's a lot of just, things that we're trying to navigate, a changing environment around us that we have zero control over. But what do plans look like for Sabrina?
There's a really good chance it'll probably be virtual plans. Probably a lot of Zoom meetings in my life. There's a lot of shame resilience work coming from me. So mainly through the awareness I've developed as a leader and as just a human, understanding all of my shame triggers and what's repeatedly tripped me up. There's some mental health awareness that's coming from me and conversations around that. And I'm really feeling called to show up and support not only people of color, but also law enforcement. So there feels like a big divide and a big gap right now. And not only do I want to be a part of building a bridge, but I also want to be a part of being a productive and mindful ally that shows up when I need to show up. And then also a productive citizen that is listening and having conversations with officers who are called to serve, who have families as well as people of color that are really struggling with being heard. There's a lot of listening that needs to happen. And in some ways, I feel like it's like a marriage. When we think about marriages or relationships and how we try and get on common ground.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
We don't do that by being in here and not hearing.
Right.
We need to be able to hear and have really uncomfortable, productive conversations. It's time. Like we're ripe and ready for it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The racial equity work will not be anything that I do because that's not what I do, and it's not my place to speak on behalf of people of color. It is my place to support and speak up when I can.
Yeah.
The shame resilience portion will probably come up.
Yeah. Well, like you said before, like there's so much anger. There's a lot of big feelings and emotions around all of that, but it's secondary. So we got to peel that anger away and really start to dig into all of the animosity that's brewing underneath there, that's causing these really outward physical acts to happen.
Yep.
That really shouldn't be happening. How do we heal from here? So yeah, I'll love to see how that work progresses. That'll be good stuff. We need it. Like you said, we need it. We're ripe for it.
Yeah, we're ready. We're ready. We just it's the vulnerability piece that's getting in the way. And then of course, shame is there. Shame is like really there right now because we can't have hard conversations on race. We can't have hard conversations around some of these changes we need in our society without walking through shame. And it's really scary. Yeah. But we'll be better for it. We can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So now for my final question, the secret question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So
I'm nervous.
Nervous. There's no wrong answer.
Okay. That's good.
If you got to play DJ for 5 minutes, you get to play any song. What are you going to play?
Oh my gosh, that's like the hardest question. Hardest question for me ever. Like, I am all over the map of music. Oh my gosh, what song would I play over and over? I really feel, I mean, I'm staring at it right now. I have this sign and it's three little birds.
Okay.
So the sign, it's actually not a sign, it's a picture. It says, don't worry about a thing. Every little thing is going to be all right. It's Bob Marley.
Mm-hmm.
So I play that song a lot in my workshops. That's probably it.
Yeah.
Three little birds.
Yeah. I love it.
Me too.
I think that's fantastic.
I want to know what your song is going to be now.
Mine changes all the time, mostly because I don't want to give the same answer on every single episode. But yeah, what have I been listening to a whole bunch of lately? So a friend of mine sent me a song. He said he was out for a run and it came on and it always makes him think of me. But it's California by OAR.
Yeah.
OAR.
I know OAR. That's a great band.
Like I listened to it, I think just like that sign of friendship and him just saying like, this is what I know about you and this is a representation of you. And I just remember listening to that song the first time and crying and like, so that would be my song right now. So, dance with the angels, dress how you wanna. I'm just like, okay, let's go. But yeah, so it does. I feel like mine would change quite frequently, but that's what it would be today.
Yeah.
So he'll probably be embarrassed that I'm not naming his name, but he'll probably still be embarrassed that I mentioned it. Oh my gosh. But this has been so wonderful.
Likewise.
I feel like we just like grazed the surface of all of the things that we could talk about as far as vulnerability and shame resilience and showing up and evolving and all of the amazing things that make up our lives. I think the process is never done.
Agreed.
But I am glad that our lives intersected at a random little seminar in Dubuque, Iowa. And you think about if sometimes I like when I get caught up in this whole idea of like life is so different now and I wanted to go back. I just think if all of this had happened in 2019 instead of 2020, my life would be so much different. Like I was positioned, like so many of these things that happened put me in a position so that I was prepared and in the right place and spaced in order to really navigate these really challenging times. So yeah. I'm so glad that this journey brought our lives together, and I look forward to all of our future conversations.
Me as well. And fingers crossed for me to be visiting Dubuque, Iowa again soon. And,
yes.
and when I do, when I do, I want to take you for dinner or coffee, and then we can do more of this in person.
Yes, so. Absolutely. I am game 100%. So thank you. I know this is like airing after the 4th, but happy Independence Day.
You as well. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye.